I don't usually start my talk by telling you what the title of it is, but today I'm going to do that because the title is really what I want to talk about today. Usually I come up with something snappy and creative, but this one just made sense. And it is, how does spirit show up for you? How does spirit show up for you? Denise just sang to us that she knows God. How does spirit show up? What's the personality of spirit? What is the voice that you hear that is the voice of God for you? What is the experience that tells you it is God? Our reading this morning, God was a little bit of a comedian, a little bit of a wise guy. In other places in the book, the author is surprised that God expresses that God has been frustrated. All of these things, several different places in the book, he talks about that. He is surprised that this God that he's talking to is not the God of the Old Testament or even the New Testament. It's not the God of the Bhagavad Gita, the Course in Miracles, or any of the other sacred writings. This God's kind of real. It's kind of hip, kind of cool. What's your God? How do you know God? Is it formal? Is it casual? What's your relationship? That's what I want to talk about this morning. For me, I have conversations with the divine on a regular basis, and it's usually when I'm driving. I found over the months that I've been talking about complaint free. Notice I'm still wearing my bracelet. Not quite there yet, but the car, the driving, those things. There's experiences in that. And as I was writing this talk this week, it was like, wow, that's where I mainly talk to God. It's like my alone time in a quiet chamber, and I can have this conversation. And it usually starts out a little formally, and then it ends up being quite casual. And I may be seeking clarity. I may be expressing concern. I may be looking for ideas, inspiration, but it's conversational. And yes, I get answers. I get answers. It's where I experience some of the biggest aha moments in my spiritual deepening. And I consider those God moments because it may be something that I've been working with for a long time at this human level, playing around with, journaling about, praying about, meditating on, talking to people, working on. No solution is coming. But when I step into that sacred space of my car and have my conversation with the divine, suddenly it is clear to me. That's a God thing for me. That's a God moment. That's a God communication. It may not be a voice. It may just be the thought is there suddenly. The clarity is there. Have you had that experience? That sudden burst of clarity that shows up and you go, wow, where's that been hiding? Where did that come from? To me, that's the divine communication. That's the divine speaking with me. I've also been known to vent, similar to what Neil Donald Walsh has done, but I'm driving, so spirit can't write through me in those moments. But I'm usually venting about something that I think is God ordained in my life. It's a God thing, and it's not going the way I think it should. Now, that whole conversation is just kind of ridiculous, isn't it, if you think about it? It's God ordained, but it's not going how I want it to. You ever been there? Yeah, yeah. So this book is something that is fascinating. I'm really enjoying the reading and I'm enjoying the conversation on Tuesday. The dialogue has been really good and I'm looking forward to more of that. But I'm finding that on almost every page, there's something that I'm going, yeah, that makes sense. And stuff that makes me stop and ponder and go, how is that? To be able to wrap my mind around the paradox. the paradox. Been studying this spirituality and science of mind for over 23 years. And that is one thing that I have come to a firm conclusion is there is a paradox in this spiritual journey. And making peace with it is part of the deepening of that journey. Is being able to elevate ourselves in consciousness enough to begin to understand the infinite nature of the divine. We saw that picture of the universe. As humans, we want to know where the end of it is, don't we? Where's the end? What's the border? What's the boundary? Where does it stop? And yet we aren't finding it. We have a hard time in our human mind understanding infinite, going on forever, unending. And that's part of the paradox that we're dealing with. Now, the paradoxes that we're finding, paradox, of course, is the logical, self contradictory statements in God is good, God is only good. But God can recognize evil, but chooses not to. But by the way, evil doesn't exist. These are some of the paradoxes that we're reading in this book that are just twisting us around a little bit in our minds to broaden our understanding of what is spirit, what is this relationship. Now, whether you believe that this book is absolute gospel or not, it's got some profound words in it. And we opened our study with it last Tuesday with that question of, do you believe this is true or not true? Or is it just a novel? And everybody pretty much unanimously said it feels right. It feels true. Everything from that to absolutely it's correct. So there's something in it that speaks to us, something in it that we know to be true when we read these words. So understanding the paradox can help us to go deeper yet into the mystery, into the abyss of this inward journey that we're on in our spiritual awakening, our spiritual journey, and our experience of the divine. One of the interesting things about the book of the month is that it is in modern language. It's in very common modern language. Our science of mind, if you've ever read the text, is a product of its generation. Its language is dated by that, by the early 1900s when it was written. It still makes a lot of sense, and yet it doesn't necessarily always just roll off the tongue when you're reading the writing from 1938, does it? Yeah, some of that older stuff. In Conversations with God, God says the language is too colloquial, too conversational, too contemporary for this book to be considered sacred writing yet. People assume that if God were talking to you, God would not sound like the fella next door. There should be some unifying, if not deifying, structure to the language, some dignity, some sense of godliness. How do you feel about that? Should God act godly, dignified? He goes on to say, or Presence goes on to say, that's part of the problem. People have a sense of God as showing up in only one form. Anything which violates that form is seen as blasphemy. Oh, I remember my first day in a Science of Mind church, and the minister started doing the prayer, God is all there is, and I am that which it is. And my eyes flew open, and I went, whoa, you can't say that in church. Anybody else have that experience? First time you start to understand your God source, it can really rock us if we have come out of other traditions that say that's not the case, that we're born in sin and that we are horrible people and we need to get forgiven and all that. It can be shocking. It can be shocking. It can feel blasphemous. Irreverent. Many of our reverends call themselves irreverent. Impious action or expression in regard to something considered inviolable or sacrosanct, something sacred. Some of the conversations in the book that are attributed to God certainly would qualify as blasphemy in many of our world's faith traditions today as we know them. Guess that's part of why I like this book so much. It's a little edgy from that standpoint. If you consider this is a conversation with the divine and it's just a normal conversation like a podcast. Wonder if it would be a podcast today. This happened in the 90s. You think it'd be a podcast today? Yeah, might be. Lee's saying, yeah, it is. It is. Yeah. For me, it's breaking down some of the old paradigms that I didn't even know I was still sitting on. Some of the really old stuff that was there. When I read the pages, and like I say, I get stuck and stop and have to ponder them, I ask myself, why is this stopping me? Why am I not just reading right through this like I have other things? You know, some of it is like, oh, yeah, that's exactly what I believe. And some of it stops me. Where are those old beliefs coming from? Where do your old beliefs come from? What causes us to go, well, that's godly, but that's not godly? The profound and the profane, as Daniel read this morning. If we truly believe it's all God, it's all God. But how can God know evil if there is no evil? The paradox. The paradox. Where did my sense of judgment about how the infinite intelligence of the universe presents itself come from? Ask yourself that question. Where did it come from? Where did your idea of what the divine is originate? Is it something you were born with? Is it something we were taught? Is it something that we learned in previous church experiences? Is it something we've learned in New Thought? Pondering that question can take a lifetime if we really immerse ourselves in it to understand where did that come from. Joe touched on this a couple of weeks ago. Does our judgment about what God is or is not come from our own personal relationship with the divine, or from the judgment and opinions and stories of others that we've accepted? Yes, and, right? Yes, and. Sure, sure they do. It comes from all of that. Until we embark on our own inward journey and discover what the divine is to us and for us. We are very much questioning beings, human beings. We question. Anybody ever wondered where we came from? Where did the first humans come from? And how did it all happen? And yeah, science has a theory and religion has a theory and I have a theory, and but where did it all really come from? You know, we're a questioning group. Why are we here? What is our purpose? Many of us ask that even today as grown-up adults. What's my purpose? Maybe we're in a life transition. What's my purpose? What's next? Why are we on this particular blue planet spinning in that ginormous universe that we saw? All those questions we have, right? All those questions. Well, God has an answer in the book. I could make you come to book study to get it, though, huh? I'll tell you. Anyway, God says we're here to be love. We are here to be love. And then God says, you're here to be God in form. And Neil goes, whoa, what? What? He says, well, what else would you be trying to do? If God is love and you're here trying to be love, you're here trying to be God. And he goes on to explain that it's very much the way that we teach that we have this God spark, that there is one source, one substance, one presence. And it has come here as you and me, as individualized expressions of itself, to experience in the physical and the experiential. It already knows conceptually. And that's a distinction about in the book a lot, is this idea of God knows everything conceptually, but hasn't experienced it physically. And so created this time-space reality, sent itself here as you and me to have these individualized expressions of what it already knows in the physical realm. It's much like watching a video of how to ride a bicycle or how to fix something, and then actually going and doing it. That was the way that I was putting it together in my mind. So that's the premise of the book. God says we're here as spirit to express what is already known. We're not here to learn anything. We already know it all. We're here to remember. We're here to remember who we really are. How does that feel instead of I'm in earth school to learn? And I will be judged and condemned if I don't do it right. Yeah, that doesn't feel very good, does it? And this expression of spirit in this book is saying that that's not even the case. That says that the best news is we can't get it wrong. How about that? We can't get it wrong no matter what we do. He says that we all go back to source, adamant that there is no hell except for the one we have in our imaginations. And the logic that is used is spot on. That you have to come to book study for. But the whole idea of no hell is subject of another talk. We're not going to talk about that today. But one question that Walsh asks is about the path to God. What is the definitive path to God? Tell me that. I need to know that. And God basically says what we say. There's many paths to the divine. There's only one God. There's only me. I don't care how you get here. It really doesn't matter. That's pretty much what we teach, isn't it? The important thing, though, is that does the path support our greater experience of our divine selves? Does the path support us in experiencing and remembering who we really are? Not something that scares us or frightens us or condemns us or any of those things that unfortunately some faith traditions over the centuries have done. There's been a lot of not nice things done in the name of religion. So if this spiritual path that you're on supports you and supports your greater unfolding and greater understanding of who you really are as spirit, as a God being, stick with it. Stick with it. Goes on to clarify by saying, come to me along the path of your heart, not through a journey of your mind. You will never find me in your mind. In order to truly know God, you have to be out of your mind. Now, there's a lot of those sorts of things in the book that are sort of double entendre, I guess. And it's true. You've got to be out of your mind. The longest distance is here to here, right? We talk about that. The longest distance is getting out of our heads and into our hearts. Ernest Holmes tells us that we're likely to indulge in too much theory and too little practice. He saw where it was going, even when he was still alive. That it's easy, where a lot of us are attracted to this teaching because it makes so much sense. It's intellectual, it's logical, right? We're attracted, it's not superstitious. And yet if we get stuck in this part and not bring it down into our hearts and embody it, we can miss that relationship with spirit, miss the relationship with the divine. Back to the journey of the heart. What, or the path of the heart? What is it? What do you think that might be? The path of the heart. Turns out only we can answer that for ourselves. Only we can answer that for ourselves. Author Jack Kornfield, he's the Buddhist monk, American Buddhist monk trained overseas, and he has written a book called A Path with Heart. And he suggests that we discover our own path and not be swayed by marketing in the spiritual trade. I thought that was an interesting turn of words, marketing in the spiritual trade. He suggests we can get sidetracked and end up experiencing in our spiritual life some of the same conditions that we may experience in our secular, such as ambition, materialism, isolation. And as I read those words and thought about it, I can see how that's possible. I can see how that's possible when we get caught in the mental gyrations, ambition. I'm going to get the next certification, right? I'm going to get the next certification in my spirituality, or the materialism and the manifestation. Science of Mind's been accused of that. We started as a healing order, a practicing healing order, because the medical community, frankly, was so bad at the turn of the century. They were still bleeding people, I think, with leeches. People didn't want to go. So there was this whole healing movement that came up. But then when medicine began to improve, then we became the manifest your good, manifest your abundance, right? But it works the same in all areas. We don't have to focus in on one of those. And the isolation. Jack says that the path of the heart touches us and transforms us from the very center of our being. And you've heard me say here before, successful living from the inside out. That's where it comes from. It comes from the heart. It comes from our center of being, and we live it outwardly. We live it outwardly. All three of these books, the Jack Kornfield book, A Path with Heart, and The Science of Mind, and Our Conversations with God, are all teaching us, saying the same message, really, to go within, to find the center of our being, and to meet ourselves and our God there. And that's where we build our relationship with the divine. That's how God shows up in our lives. And that's how we know that who and what that presence is for us. For us. In the profane, in the profound. Continue to elevate in awareness. It's all God. It's all God. And it's all necessary. For without the dark, we would not know the experience of light. Without the light, we couldn't know the experience of dark. So all of the opposites are needed in order for us to live a life of choice. The wrinkle in the game is, what choices are we making, right? What choices are we making? So doing our practices, part of the way that we do that is that we practice our teaching. We have our practicing the principles each week. I end my talk every week with some take-home practices that you can use throughout the week in your daily life. And we have what we call a Mindful Monday newsletter that goes out on Monday mornings. It's a recap of the talk and the quotes and these practices in greater detail. And you can sign up in the lobby on the table there. You can sign up online. You can just point your camera at the QR code and sign up there, and I'll add you to Monday morning's list. So our first practice this week is, where and how does spirit show up? Understanding how spirit shows up for us. I'm going to invite you to write down a few ideas about how God does and does not show up in the happenings and doings of your day. This is obviously God. God's not in this thing. God's not in the laundry. God's not in the dishes. Right? God's not in the newscast. God's not in the political ads. All of those things, right? Write down for you where God is and is not in your life. Ask why you believe this, and ask if it's true. Ask if it's true. Number 2, am I following a path with heart? That's Jack Cornfield's question, and I invite you to pose it to yourself this week. Allow the mystery and the beauty of that question to resonate with you as you think about it, as you contemplate it, as you meditate on it. And expect that somewhere within you that answer will come forward. Am I following a path with heart? Whether it is in this spiritual community, whether it is in your family life, your business career, your volunteer work, whatever it is that you're involved in, ask yourself, am I following a path with heart? And record your answers. I'm going to invite you to another tool to experience some heart opening while you prepare to do this piece of the exercise. And there's a beautiful recording by Lisa Ferraro and Erica Luckett, and it's called Open, hang on, Open My Heart, I believe it is. Yes, Open My Heart. Thank you, Joe. Open My Heart. And it's a beautiful chant that you can listen to. It's about 6 minutes. Just opening your heart up, and then ask yourself this question: am I following a path with heart? You can find this on YouTube. Just type in Lisa Ferraro and Open My Heart, and it should pop up for you. Number 3, I'm going to invite you to write a letter to God this week. Write a letter to God. Julia Cameron with Artist Way taught us about morning pages, and getting up and writing very first thing in the morning is when we're mostly in the flow. So before you check your phone and your email and do all of those things and get into the activity of the day, sit down and give yourself about 30 uninterrupted minutes and write a letter to God. Center yourself, get yourself grounded and ready to write, and just start out, Dear God, and see what flows. See what flows in your life when you start a letter to God. I invite you to step more deeply into your relationship with the divine this week, and to know and see and begin to understand how God shows up in, through, and as you. I'll close this morning with one final quote from Conversations with God. Truth and God are found in the same place, in the silence. In the silence. And so I invite you now to join me as we go into the silence for an affirmative prayer. Actually, no. You have that music. We've got a little time. I'm going to invite you to open your hearts. Close your eyes and listen with Lisa and Erica. Open our hearts. Open wide, open wide. Open wide, open And from this place, with our hearts wide open, we recognize that God is right where we are. All of it expressing in, through, and as each of us as a unique expression of it in this time, space, reality, right here, right now. And so I bless each of us this day, knowing that we each have all that we need to express and experience our heartfelt desires, knowing that all that we desire comes to us with ease and with grace, and that as we sit on the precipice of decision, of choice, that we are blessed to have a choice, and that we're blessed to be able to decide, and that we are guided and guarded at all times by our higher awareness, our higher selves, our higher love. For love is who and what we are. I know this day that anyone that has anything on their heart, as they bring it into the consciousness of this prayer, that we as community hold them in our light and in our love, as we know the full and complete manifestation of whatever that desire, that need, that answer might be. We know it and we claim it, we accept it for that beloved right here, right now. And so it is with a heart filled with joy and thanksgiving and so much gratitude that I release this prayer into the action and activity of law, knowing that it is done. And we affirm that together by saying, and so it is.